Mrs. P. You poor thing. We know there's a bigger story behind this, but you're gonna have to eventually show yourself so we can figure it out. What's going on, guys? My name's Anthony, or Big B Stats, and welcome back to some more Piggy Chapter 10 predictions. And today, I decided to focus on Mrs. P, kind of share with you some predictions and theories that I've been thinking about. And this is quite interesting because I don't think many people really thought about this. Also, if you are enjoying the Piggy prediction videos, if you can, leave a like on this video, and also feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if you're new, and if you want to follow me over on Instagram as well, I'll be doing a really cool giveaway soon, so make sure you can get a head start on that. And if you want to show your further support, feel free to use star code BIGB2 when purchasing Robux. With that being said, let's start talking about Mrs. P and what we actually think is going on. So before I get straight into detail about Mrs. P, I do want to talk about how we even got to this point, just in case if you're not caught up on the prediction videos, and if you actually don't know what's really going on in the story. Maybe you're just decided to play Piggy today, and you're not really caught up on what the story may possibly lead to, or some of the things we actually saw before. So today I'm focusing on Mrs. P, Mademoiselle Potato, which if you don't know who that is, with all the speculations and also all the research, turns out to be Mr. P's wife. Now do bear in mind this could possibly change. Let's say if Minitoon decides that it's not going to be the wife, it's going to be the sister, or it's going to be a friend. Again, that all just depends on Minitoon and how they decide to go with it. But if we go with this based off the Peppa Pig show, I do believe that is his wife. However, if you do Google, I believe what Mademoiselle means, I think it just means like a friend. Like it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be someone's wife or, a daughter, because I know when Mrs. P first got, when we first got the picture revealed about it, we thought that Mrs. P was either the daughter or the wife, but we also kind of narrowed it down to thinking this is the wife. So if we rewind back to the hospital, I don't know if you remember, but we saw that note. I believe it was the hospital, or it was actually one in the metro as well. And it was talking about patient 0 and also talking about how, she is sick, I need to find a cure and things like that. And then we also have TSP getting involved, which I don't think I'll talk too much about TSP in this one. Again, I want to focus on Mrs. P because I feel like no one's really focused on Mrs. P, especially me. And with all these clues, we kind of narrowed it down that she is the one that is sick. So let's get this started. We'll break down things we know, things we do not know just yet. So Mrs. P, okay, now we know if we base this off three characters, three potato potentially characters, three characters that are potentially potatoes. Mr. P, we know for sure. TSP, again, this will be the only thing I mentioned about TSP. TSP, which could potentially be the super potato. And then we have Mrs. P. Now we got our first reveal of what Mrs. P actually looked like, and that's when it actually clicked. Because with those notes saying that she is sick, she needs a cure, around the same time, Bunny was sick as well, and Bunny was also looking for Mr. P, and Mr. P kept leaving and things like that. And we also met Mr. P in the sewers. But it turned out that, I still always think about that look that Bunny gave when Mr. P actually left in the helicopter after leaving the hospital. I always think about that look, and then part of that also made me think that, let's say Mr. P is evil, and that's kind of like where it really all started. But then in chapter 8 at the very end, they added in a very cool secret. At the very end, you're talking to Zizzy and Pony when you escape, and you see a picture on a shelf, and that picture is Mrs. P. Now what Mrs. P looks like is a flower, a potato with a flower on their head. So that's what Mrs. P looks like. And then we go to chapter 9, and we have another really cool secret here, which I'll touch more on this topic, and that was on top of the rooftop. If we look across the building, we saw a shadow outline of a potato, and this potato was kind of raising a lot of questions because the way they angled this was also quite good. It was like, okay, is this a flower hat? Is it a normal hat? So it kind of, I think they definitely did everything they could. Not maybe they didn't think too much on it, but I looked at it again, and you can kind of see where it didn't give too much of the flower, but it also looked like the hat. Like if you just kind of glance at it, you almost think it's a hat, but if you really pay attention to how the grooves actually go, at least like the round, like it was more grooves than the hat. Like the hat kind of has the actual sides of it goes out a lot more, and then it goes all the way up and around to the top of the hat, whereas the flower kind of has like, you know, a bunch of lumps, let's say, shall I say. So the shadow hat part had more lumps in it, which would definitely make it, you know, the flower, obviously. So I think we can confirm that the person in this rooftop building is Mrs. P. Now, what I want to know is that why is she watching us? Why is she there? We see her now twice, and I think it's funny that the episodes that we're actually going after Mr. P, for the most part, especially when they start picking up, that's when we kind of start seeing a bit more, or when someone gets infected, that's when we kind of start getting more clues to something else. So I'm almost certain there's going to be a really cool Easter egg in chapter 10, most likely. So I asked myself that question: why is she watching us? Is she trying to warn us? Is she trying to, is she trying to tell us something? But we also have to think that, let's say if we go back to the root of all this, if she's infected, I'm pretty sure she's actually cured now. Wouldn't she be cured if she's standing in the window looking at us? Or what if she actually is infected, but is also still aware? Who knows if maybe she had the first batch of the cure and it's like still, or maybe even if you also thought about this, which I think about this, which I don't think this is the case, but just a quick side note is that sometimes you have like a poisonous potato and they're green. So imagine that Mrs. P is actually infected, but kind of has control over being infected at least, and is kind of afraid to really show herself, because again, you always think that, well, at least what I thought is that, the original story is, now that we established that Mr. P, knows that his wife, Mrs. P, is sick, goes out to try and find a cure and starts testing on the Peppa Pig family. But however, it seems now that Mrs. P is cured. So what if Mrs. P is actually looking for Mr. P and Mr. P is just out there trying to find, still trying to work on this cure when it actually worked? Because we really don't know how this cure is actually going. All we know is that it's infecting people and no one's been cured just yet. And it's not confirmed that Mrs. P was actually infected. So who knows exactly? But a lot of people are thinking, Mrs. P is possibly patient 0. But again, everywhere we're actually looking, we're all also seeing, Mr. P, or now it's going to be Mrs. P. So it's just now trying to figure out is she infected? Can she control this infection? Was she ever infected? If she was even, is this the purpose? Like, is the she's talking about? Are they being framed? Is Mr. P being framed? That's also a big thing going around. And the big key to that is also, how long does this infection last? It could be that this infection doesn't even last that long and it just actually wears off. And again, Mr. P doesn't actually even know. And Mrs. P is, just cured. And then, yeah, it could be one of those cases as well, is that, again, Mr. P is so caught up in trying to do this, or again, TSP is actually framed Mr. P and then Mrs. P, I'm kind of getting them all confused now. And then Mrs. P is already cured and just kind of like waiting. But wouldn't you think she would actually show herself if she was actually cured? So that's something to also think about as well. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think that Mrs. P is actually infected but kind of has some bit of a control over it? I know a lot of people are also thinking that Bunny is infected and also kind of has a control over it as well, but I think that would be really cool to see like a green infected Mrs. P. Just a thought. I don't think that will happen, but we'll just have to see how that actually works out. I'm also going to talk about some things with chapter 10 as well, as chapter 10 is not coming out this weekend, but it should be out the weekend after this weekend. So if you're watching this, it should be out around the 25th, I believe 24th, 25th, if everything goes well. So yeah, we're also going to be getting 2 new skins in this. Now, do I think there will be, a Mr. P skin eventually? Hopefully I do. I mean, that would be really cool. I don't think we'll get Mrs. P and Mr. P straight away, but maybe we'll get Molly Mole and maybe the giraffe. That's just a theory of mine. Who knows? Again, when we get the skins, I'll be sure to cover it. But again, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. So what I'm also going to do is take it to the comments and see what they think about Mrs. P. So this first comment was by Gracia Gotcha, and they said, I have a prediction. TSP is a bad group. So we're thinking that that's a group, not an individual. In Carnival, the purple tent says, Doggy and Pony got what was coming to them. That means that they actually probably infected Doggy and Pony. It all makes sense. So that means TSP could have been kidnapped, George, and was the one who made Doggy evil in the forest. Ooh, Mrs. P is probably still trapped in the house in city watching over the infected or something like that. But I think that is what did happen. TSP got infected at the carnival and wrote the note before we came, and before he wrote the note, this is the worst place to look for safety. They are probably trying to frame Mr. P now, and maybe they are all under George's control, as he is probably mad people thought he was kidnapped, missing, etc. Or because he is mad in general. That's a really cool theory, that you're thinking that George is actually mad and angry about this and he's just not missing. I really like this theory. This next theory is by Cheers Party of 4, and they said, okay, I think Mr. P and the Super Potato are working together. Mr. P and the Super Potato are lab partners. Ooh, one day as Mr. P got home, saw that Mrs. P was sick, and he was so sad that he did not want to work, so he gave all his money to the Super Potato, and so he called his lab partners so they could help all the animals, including Piggy. And they were busy, so he was mad that he hunted them down to infect them. Luckily, some of them were having a sleepover. Doggy, George, Pig, Bunny, Molly Mole, Fizz, Pedro Pony. When they saw what they saw, they ran far away. 4 weeks later, he had infected Doggy. 2 days later, he also infected Bunny, and he couldn't give her much, and time passed and he had almost infected all of them except Zizzy, you, and Pedro Pony. The man behind the dumpster is Molly Mole. Very interesting. ASA says, what if Mr. P accidentally gave them the wrong potion to Mrs. P? And another chapter, Mrs. P is evil. I think at this point, we can't trust any of the potatoes. Dove says, honestly, I think TSP stands for the safe place. A few videos ago, you pointed out that it was very peculiar that Pony and Zizzy showed up looking for survivors, and that the safe place, when the note at the beginning says, if you're looking for safety, this is the worst place to look, or something along those lines. I think that both Pony and Zizzy are traitors. Ooh, however, I also think that the entire safe place could be working with Mr. P to draw new test subjects in. I mean, Zizzy just reminds me of Regina George as an animal, and Pony is an absolute bean. They're perfect for the plot twist, Pony especially. Also, I agree with others that chapter 10 is the sewers. If you've ever been to a big city like New York or Sacramento, or a city with alleyways, nonetheless, most of those areas have dumpsters towards the back with, like one, assuming Molly Mole was behind. And very close to the dumpsters are sewers. So Molly may be introduced, and she could probably bring us down to her safe place, as everyone, Zizzy and Ponies, have been infected. Then move to chapter 11, where we come out of the sewers, where it's going to be at. We're going out on the limb here, Mr. Potato's entire corporation. I don't know where to go from there yet. So we'll have to see with chapter 10, but Dove, this was such a good theory, well written, and you covered some really good points here. Wow. Lisa Irish says, theory is that Mr. P's wife, Mrs. P, is sick, and the Piggy family agreed to try to help Mrs. P, but it went wrong, and they drank a potion Mr. P gave them, and they told George not to, so if anything went wrong, he could get the police. And that's when the infection grew and started. Oh my goodness, that is really good. Kelly Fowler says, what my thoughts are for chapter 10 is Mr. P and Mrs. are infected and they are bots, and the place is a zoo, and lots of animals are trying to kill you, but they are secretly on your side and kill Mrs. P and Mr. P. And the new skins are three-headed Hydra and Giraffe, and also Mrs. P and Mr. P. Oh my goodness. You know, look, nothing is too far off, okay? Maybe the three-headed Hydra, but we'll have to see. Jaden says the origin is that Mrs. P got sick in the hospital and Daddy and Mommy Pig volunteered to test the potion, but when they drank it, they turned evil, and they attacked everyone in the hospital and left Mrs. P while at the house. Map, Peppa and George was at home, but in the front door open, it was Mommy Pig and Daddy Pig, and infected Peppa, but George ran away, so he called the cops, but he heard a noise. George Pig thought it was another infected, but it was us, but George made a noise. Then Piggy saw us and hit us with a bat, and George ran away. And that's how it all began through chapter 1. Jaden, you're on to something. Nadine Chang says Mrs. P was in the window of the building. I 100% agree with that. Nia Redmond says, okay, we saw Mrs. Potato in the building, so who would be able to get behind the dumpster so quickly? Mrs. Potato, and then maybe that means Mr. Potato has found the cure because she was not standing still in the building watching us if she was infected. Another reason is Mrs. Potato because she was watching us from the building, so she was watching us from the dumpster. So she was also watching us from the dumpster. Please like because I really want Biggie to see and say this in his next video. Thank you, I appreciate that one. I definitely don't think she's behind the dumpster, but again, it's a shadow figure, but it's not the shape of a potato, but it could be someone we have not met yet. C Animation Studio / random stuff says, Mr. P's wife / daughter is patient 0, and Mr. P is trying to find a cure. TSP, the super potato, is Mr. P's wife / daughter. She's placing the notes around the carnival trying to get a message across and figuring that the infected don't talk. With the note at the entrance of the carnival talking about a safe place and how carnival isn't the greatest place to go, maybe TSP / Mr. P's wife / daughter / patient 0 knows that Mr. P is evil and trying to warn you about something that might occur. Mr. P's wife / daughter was originally named Patient 0 by some scientists. Then when Mr. P found out, he wanted to help her by finding a cure. TSP could be another name for Mr. P's wife or daughter, so no one will figure out that it is Mr. P's wife daughter placing the notes. True. Maybe Mr. P is infected himself and he is Patient 0. I saw in another vid talking about how you, the player, could be Patient 0 and how you're infected, but you don't show signs of aggression and you see things like Doggy in the hospital. Maybe that happened to Mr. P. That is so good. So maybe, let's say Mr. P is, for an example, we don't know what's real at this point. Let's say we're actually hallucinating, seeing all the animals, and at the end we're in the hospital still, or we're hallucinating seeing Mrs. P. I'll probably get more into detail with that at some point, but that's a new angle to really think about things. And I think that will conclude today's video, ladies and gentlemen, talking about Mrs. P. This was very interesting. It definitely widened my perspective a lot on some things, and I'll definitely be covering some more theories coming soon, but I would love to hear your thoughts and theories and predictions on chapter 10 and just the story in general, on what you think. I've been reading through the comments as well, and you guys are just doing a phenomenal job. And again, I appreciate all the support on the channel. You guys are, again, phenomenal, and I thank each and every one of you. But thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, if you did enjoy, feel free to leave a like and share it. Also, feel free to subscribe for more, and if you're new and if you want to stay up to date with more Piggy, and I will see you all in the next video.